Good evening, and Erev Lag Boimer, getting into Lag Boimer. Start off with a capital Tilim for those who need a for Shlema. Particularly, I'd like to mention Chana Yenta Rivka Bas Shendol, her for Shlema. I'm not certain to David, Ya Ancha Adonai and Zora, Yisagev Hashem Elohe Yaakov, Yishlach Ezracha Mekodesh, Moitziah Yisadecha, Yizker Kol Mechisecha, Velascha Yidach Nasela, Yitan Lachocha Wavecha, Wachalat Sosacha Yamale, Neranan Abishuasecha, Hashem Elohim Nidgel, Yamale Adonai Kol Meshalesecha, Atiyodati, Hishia Adonai Meshicha, Yaneh Mishmi Kodshay, Igwuris Yeshe Minoi, Eila Borechev, Veila Vasesem, Anachnu B'Shem Adonai Elohim Nazkir, Hey Makaro, and Apollo, Anachnu Kamnu, Vanis Eidod, Adonai Yeshua Melech Yaneh, Nurein Kareno. Considered stock, I don't have any change handy. I've always encouraged to do stocker together with Torah and Tefillah. Okay, let's start. So, going into Lag Boimer, so to share with you a word. Thank you. This quote we have here, thank you. It's from Seder Hadoros. Seder Hadoros lived about 400 years ago. My father, Olav Shalom, told me that the Baal Seder Hadoros was a Baal Ruach HaKodesh, a B'chil Helperin. He, besides collating information from all of the Gemara, etc., about the various, it's like a list of biographies or of personalities throughout the Tanakh and throughout the Gemara. But he also brings from the Sifrei Kabbalah, and so there's a lot about Gilgulim, identifying who's who and what's their previous identity. So here's some fascinating stuff which I never heard until this year, and that's the following. Number one, so let's look at the top of the page. Rabbi Akiva Hoyo Gilgul Zimri.
Guy, have you started speaking?
Yes. You can't hear me? Can't hear?
I can hear fine.
Okay. Right. So again, so we have here Rabbi Akiva is a Gilgul of Zimri ben Solu, and he was the Nasi of the tribe of Shimon. Now, the tribe of Shimon, they had this kind of the whole story with Zimri when and there was a whole fight, and it says that there were 24 by the end of Parshas Bolok. Hamesim b'magefo arbo ve'esrim olef. There are 24,000 people who fell in the attack on the tribe of Shimon. And we've got here Rabbi Akiva. We know the story with Rabbi Akiva. He had 24,000 Talmidim, and they all died in this period, and that's why we got the mourning during Sfiras Shomer, and they stopped dying on Lag Boimer, and that's the reason why we have one of the reasons for Lag Boimer, that the Meis Talmidei Chacham of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying. So let's read this again. Zimri, Rabbi Akiva is a Gilgul of Zimri ben Solu. Zimri ben Solu is from the tribe of Shimon. Shehorag b'Shechem. Now Shimon, as in Shimon the son of Yaakov, he and Levi actually made a massacre in Shechem. Now Shenoi Molu Chof Dalud Aleph. This information is new to me. That the number of people killed in Shechem by that massacre was 24,000 people by Shimon and Levi. But they actually were innocent in a sense, because they were innocent and they had actually they had a bris. They had conformed with the request and they'd had a bris. So now, because Shimon had massacred the people of Shechem to the number of 24,000, the Chach Nehergu Biznus im Zimri. Therefore, in a kind of retaliation. The tribe of Shimon was punished with 24,000 people who were killed by that Magefa. The Gilgulam, that wasn't finished yet. The Gilgulam hoyu chavdalad elef talmidei Rebbe Akiva. And then the tikkun, so to speak, for the massacre in Shechem came back a second time with the Talmidei Rebbe Akiva, and he gives a reference to Matsubara Mamoris from that's from Miruah Chayriki. Okay. That's one piece of information. 24,000, and that connects Rebbe Akiva to Zimri to Shimon. Then we go a little bit further. The next piece, I've skipped a little piece there, because for Chesed Avram, the Gilgul Nefesh Zimri, hu Rebbe Akiva, hu Tikunoi. Rebbe Akiva, it came as the neshama of Zimri to rectify what Zimri had, where he had gone wrong. The Cosby he is Evel. Cosby, who was the shiksa who Zimri was caught with, and she was also killed, she came back in the form of Izebel. And I'm going to skip for a moment the next line, where we see that Izebel had an obsession to chase Eliyahu. Why was she obsessed to punish Eliyahu? Because Eliyahu zeh Pinchas. Pinchas had murdered her, and therefore she was obsessed to take revenge against Eliyahu zeh Pinchas, or Pinchas zeh Eliyahu. Meanwhile, Izebel, so Cosby came back again in the form of Izebel, the wife of King Achov, and then she came back again. And this time she came back as the wife of Turnus Rufus. And there's a story in Gemara of the Zora Daf Chof, where Rebbe Akiva, he would often have debates with Turnus Rufus. And Turnus Rufus got very upset that he was always losing the debate. So he came home and he was in a bad mood. And his wife said, "What's the problem?" So he said that there's this Jewish sage who is always vanquishing me in debates. So she said, "Do you give me permission to test his integrity?" And she dressed herself up as a Zaina, and she went to Rebbe Akiva to try to seduce him to do something immoral with her. Rebbe Akiva obviously wasn't seduced, and when he saw her, he did three things. He cried, he spat, he cried, and he laughed. So Mrs. Turnus Rufus says to Rebbe Akiva, "What's the meaning of those three reactions?" So he says, "Two I will tell you, one I won't. I spat because you, as any other human for that matter, is born from a tipos rucha, from a smelly bit of sperm. So people are proud with their beauty, but after all, what is a human being? It's just coming from a bit of sperm. There's nothing really to be proud of. I cried because of your beauty will decompose in the dust eventually. You'll die and you'll become decomposed in the dust." So that's why he spat and that's why he cried. And then she says, "But why did you laugh? Or why did you smile?" He says, "I told you I'm not going to tell the third thing." Years later, I don't remember exactly the details why, she was no longer married to Turnus Rufus, and she was intrigued about Yiddishkeit, and she was Megayer, and she then got married to Rebbe Akiva. So that was why Rebbe Akiva smiled, because he could see in Ruach HaKodesh that she was destined to get married to him. And when she did, she actually brought with a fortune. And so Rebbe Akiva, in his later years, well, he also had a fortune because of his wife, Rachel, was the daughter of Kalba Sabua. That's a separate story. But more also, she brought a fortune to him. But that wasn't Rebbe Akiva's biggest excitement. So let's come back. So we got here, Cosby comes back in Izebel, who chases Eliyahu zeh Pinchas, and then comes back in the form of in the form of the wife of Turnus Rufus, and now meets up with Rebbe Akiva, who is a Gilgul of Zimri, who was her mate in a sense, in the previous Gilgul, or two generations back. Now, here comes another interesting twist. The Zimri hoya bendino koidem shenos Shimon. We know that Dinah had been abducted by Shechem. Well known that Osnas, who got married to Yosef HaTzadik, she was born from Shechem, and the reason why, and although she was brought up in Yaakov's house, and the name Osnas means Lashon Osoin, which can mean accident or can mean rape, whatever. Oines. So she was from that union. But here he's saying that actually Zimri is also somehow from that lineage, from Dinah before she got married to Shechem. In other words, Zimri actually had Shechem genes in him. So it makes all the more sense how he was in a sense, he was trying to settle accounts. And then he kind of leads this rebellion, as if in the name of the 24,000 people of Shechem who were massacred. So no one's just suggesting he had it in mind consciously, but subconsciously he was leading this rebellion, and 24,000 people fell in kind of retribution for the massacre in Shechem. Then, what does it finish off? But Chav Dal Elef, there's 24,000 which were killed in Shechem, and were killed by Shimon. They came back again as a Talmid Rebbe Akiva, and they were punished because they didn't respect one another. Similar, they should have remembered the sin of Shittim, which they hadn't been cleansed from. So what we're having here, a fascinating journey of Rebbe Akiva, going back to Zimri and going back to Shimon in a sense, and then we've got his wife going back to Izel, going back to Cosby, and the 24,000 kind of happens 3 times over, so to speak. Finally, it's a bit repetitious, and I'll explain to you why. Because the Esed Hadoros is drawing from various sources. So the first one was from one source from Sarma Morris, and this is from another source from Chesed Lavrom. So he brings them kind of more or less what they say in full. But then the next comment is unrelated to this whole journey, and that is that Rebbe Akiva, his name Akiva relates to the word Okev, which means a heel. Now, when Yaakov was born, it says that he seized onto the heel of Esau. V'yodoi oichezes ba'akev Esau. His hand was holding onto the heel of Esau. So, in a sense, now we know that Rebbe Akiva was originally, his origins were from Gerim. So he had non-Jewish, he had Esau origins. So Yaakov, as he's born, is pulling something away from the heel of Esau, and that's Rebbe Akiva, who is kind of redeemed from Esau and brought over into Kedusha. And then the next piece he says about the Vovs that Rebbe Akiva we see has later, he's very much into darshaning Vovs, and he explains that's got to do with this story. Okay, so that's, I think, just some fascinating stuff as a Hakdama. Let's go on to the next thing on our list, and that is that someone asked me he had seen some kind of bencher, but it had this famous song Yedid Nefesh, and it said there, now we say Simchas Olam. So he asked me, was it just a mistake? So my curiosity was piqued, and so here you have this. What I have over here, I believe, is from a Sephardi Siddur called Beis Oived or Beis Menucha. So the Sephardi Nusach actually has V'hoyse loch shivchas olam, and this is from a Chabad Siddur. The lower one is from a Chabad Siddur. V'hoyse lo simchas olam. Now
was that a misprint?
No, it's not a misprint. Let's explain. So this goes back to the one who composed this song, it's attributed to the Haredim. That is Rebbe Eliezer Azkari or Azzakari, who was a contemporary of the Arizal. He lived in Sfas at the time. And this is attributed to him, although there's those who say originally it had 5 stanzas, and the extra stanza was a daled, and therefore it had the name Yehuda. Then later it was the daled stanza was taken away, and it's left with the Rosh Hashanah of Yud Kei Vav Kei, and that's the way it is in most prints. But then in the first print of the Charedim, which I didn't manage to look inside, although I have it on the Oitzar, I couldn't find it there. The first print it said V'hoi solo shivchas olam, and so the printer didn't understand what does it mean V'hoi solo shivchas olam. It should be she shall become an eternal maidservant. So he changed it to V'hoi solo simchas olam. And then a later print it was then corrected. It shows V'hoi soloch shivchas olam. So here we have that we're talking about the love of the neshama to Hashem. Rafon Allah, heal the neshama and show it your glory, your beauty, and the neshama will be bound to you, will be committed to you. But so that seems to be the original form. However, the Ashkenazi form has evolved to that the neshama, by having this joy of getting close to the Eibishter, would have this tremendous, this eternal joy. So they're both nuschois and what they mean.
What's the pshat if you say shivchas?
That the neshama will be committed, as if we also evet nem or evet poshut, eternally committed. That's the pshat. Okay, let's go on. So this is not so much halacha. Let's get to halacha. So, having discussed in the previous weeks about the croutons, and I mentioned last week that the definition of the broch on the croutons will be, if they're deep fried, is mezainis, because even though it retains what we call torisa de nama, it still has the constitution of bread, but because it's been cut down to smaller than a kazayas, and now it's in and it's been cooked, so then it goes down to mezainis. So deep fried croutons are mezainis. Okay, good. So someone asked me, what about Matsubara? What's the bracha on Matsubara? So let's read here. This is again from the Alter Rebbe's Seder Birchas Hanenin, and what you have at the bottom is from Reb Avram Alashvili. He's a brilliant Talmud Chochem and lives in Lud, and has published numerous for him. But one of his masterpieces has been the presentation of Seder Birchas Hanenin, and to the back of the volume you have a tavla, a table of a list of all foods and brachas, the appropriate brachas. So I'm going to first read actually his table. Lechem pira lepirurim pchusim mikazais v'govalesem b'mashkim v'tignom v'leholacht mehem te'alechem. If you took bread, broke it into small pieces less than a kazayas, mixed them in a liquid, you fried them, but it hasn't lost the appearance of bread. So he says lo yochel elo teichas. It's a suffix, but it's mezonus or mahamotzi, and therefore he's saying that you should only eat it during a meal. You can't make mezonus on it, you can't make a hamotzi on it because of a suffix. So now let's learn the halacha properly. So Sif Tesvav. Perure lechem pchusim mikazais. If you've got crumbs of bread which are less than a kazais, v'shechibrom v'dibkom ayidei dvash v'chol v'morok. They've been sucked together with honey, with milk, with soup. If they become mushy, they don't no longer have this kind of, I'm suggesting, this stringy, fibrous structure of which bread has, like with pores and all that. It's become mushy, not that form. Then the bracha is going to become mezonus. Because it was less than a kazayis. So this we have, that's the basis of, let's say, challah kugel, which we all know from kids that we didn't used to throw out bread, chas v'shalom. So it was left over challah, so then it was recycled into challah kugel, and that was mezainis. By the way, in Brunois, Baruch, you probably remember B'Srol Noach. So in your times he was an old man, he was 70. In my times, he was an old man, he was 90. And so B'Srol Noach lived with his son who was 70, and found down and so how do these two old men, and his wife had died years ago. So how do you make mazonas? They took the French bread, soaked it overnight, and the next morning it became mazonas. And that was their mazonas found down. Go tell it to the Bachram today. Okay, to myself too. Okay. But if the bread did not lose its consistency through the cooking, it's still got the structure of bread. So even if you've cooked it and was smaller than the kazais, but if it didn't lose the appearance of bread, if you have it for a meal, that's going to become possibly hamotzi. But the mikki is the last line. When it comes to frying, so there's a question which is mentioned a couple of times in this chapter. We've got cooking and we've got baking. Cooking is with lots of liquid and softening the material. Baking is usually drying out the material. Don't know what baking does. Frying is with a little bit of liquid. Well, the food does sometimes become a bit more stiff through frying, but what is the definition of frying? Is it considered bishul, or so if it's deep frying is for sure is like bishul, and therefore that's why I said croutons, which are deep fried, become mezonis. But if it's just like Matsubara, you break the matzah into small pieces, and then you fry it with a little bit of liquid, a little bit of oil, even though it's a millimeter or two, but it's not a lot. It's not deep fried. So then he says, so we're going to be stuck when it comes to frying. Is it called cooking, and therefore it's made the matzah brei into mazonis? Is it similar to baking, and therefore the matzah brei still remains hamotzi? And that's why Rabbi Alashvili is telling us, because he says you should be machmer on both sides, so matzah brei remains sofik, and therefore you'd only have matzah brei during the meal. Okay.
Dan, what do you mean by during a meal? Does that mean if you only ate that as your main course, you would wash over it?
That even then it's a shaila, because if you say it's called mevushal, then it's gone down to mezonis, and that's what he said before. If it actually lost what he said over here, even if you ate a lot of it, even kaver suda, it still remains mezonis. When you mush the challah, it becomes mezonis gomer, even if you're kaver suda. When it doesn't lose its toya lechem, then he's saying we're not sure whether it becomes mezonis gomer in other words, mezonis gomer is not upgradable to hamotzi. Like pasta can't be makam hamotzi. Whereas if it's somewhere in between, then it can be upgraded. And what he's saying here, we're not sure whether when it's not been really mushed and still left its toya lechem, whether it's going to can become mezonis or it's going to remain hamotzi. It remains a suffix. So there we go. So the matzah brei means it remains. So what he's saying, b'chol inyan, whether if you have a shiur k'vei suda or even less, either way he's saying that if it's tigun again, sorry, yeah, but so tigun yesh lahachmi, I can't make my mind up whether this has become a mazonis or is it still hamotzi. Okay, let's move on. So someone asked me this week, a shaila, that his optometrist has told him that he can see some kind of development and it might develop into a cataract, but a way to discourage that developing, wearing sunglasses will help him not have to have a cataract operation in the next few years. So now he's asking about wearing sunglasses on Shabbos in the street. So we learned this came up because we're learning Siman Shi and Aleph on Shabbos afternoon, And we've got things which are garments, which we're allowed to wear on Shabbos, obviously, in the street. We are allowed to wear tachshitim, ornaments, jewelry. We're also allowed to wear other accessories, which are making our ability to function better. That seems to be the definition of glasses. Glasses enables you to function better. It's not that you're carrying the glasses because you need them somewhere else. They are they're enabling you to manage your life better as you are. That seems to be the basis of wearing the permission to wear glasses on Shabbos. I know that my uncle David Raskin Shalom, for years he didn't wear glasses on Shabbos in the street, and then the Rebbe once in a sikha, kind of in a comment in passing, said, explain why that's why you're allowed to wear glasses in the street on Shabbos. So from then on, he changed. He started wearing his glasses, but I don't know whether he did a hatosh nadarim or not. I never asked him. Okay, let's read now what it says here in Shmiras Shabbos Gilchasa. Mishkevei shemesh regilim she'odom markiv kedei la'agein al einav mepgias karnei hashemesh. Regular sunglasses, which means not prescription ones, which are just to protect from the sun rays. Ein latzeis b'hem rishus harabim. One shouldn't wear them in the street. Included are if you're wearing the sunglasses on top of regular glasses. So these can be two forms. They can be either those clip-ons, or you can have like a bigger pair of glasses which sit on top of the regular glasses. And meanwhile is saying that they shouldn't be worn on Shabbos. Now, but then we're not finished yet. And now here we have the notes in the Shmiras Shabbos Gilchasa that the Hard Tzvi. Hard Tzvi is that's the Pesach Frank, who was the Rav of Yerushalayim about 60 years ago. I heard that Rabbi Shimon would say that many of the contemporary poskim he's okay, he can sich vermessen on par, but he had great respect for the Hard Tzvi. So after the Hard Tzvi talks about regular glasses being, he calls it a malbush, and it says that he says that sunglasses are not called a regular malbush. Then he says mipnei refuah hitiru bizman hazeh she'einon rishus harabim gemura. That for medical reasons, if you don't have a proper rishus harabim, that would be okay. The person tends to get some inflammation in his eyes if he doesn't wear those sunglasses. If it's not a proper rishus harabim, then one can be lenient with wearing sunglasses to protect from inflammation, and should be careful not to take them off in when it comes shade, obviously, that is going to be carrying on Shabbos. So there seems to be, where there is a rishus harabim gemura, there seems to be a worry about wearing sunglasses. Whereas, I mean, if it's a long-term condition, the only thing I can suggest is to get photogray lenses for your regular glasses, and those you're allowed to wear. And the photogray lenses are part of the glasses. There's no shiloh of carrying, and it's not a worry of coloring when you expose it to it changes color, because it doesn't remain. So that would be if it's a long-term condition, that would be a solution. Okay, right. Another topic totally. I got a question from a boy. I don't know who he is, but he sent me this question, that we have this idea of the Alter Rebbe talks about a blanket having 4 corners, so it's a question of tzitzis. So the Alter Rebbe recommends to cut off the corner of the blanket. Now, the only ones I've seen who do this is Brochure in yeshiva, and usually it's the yeshiva blankets. But the reason why I haven't seen anywhere else is because it's only in the yeshiva that I go around in the dormitory. I would see that. I wouldn't see other people's their blankets in their bedrooms. But it's not so well known. If you are going to be machmir, Don't do a quilt full of feathers unless you want to do hafotza. So now, this is the Alter Rebbe's lashon. V'chein hamichse shekorin. This is in the Siddur. Hamichse shekorin koldre. The koldre is that was brought up with that word. A blanket is a shemachas miskasin boy kesheyoshin b'yoyim. A blanket which is worn when you sleep during the day. Afin ikra yimichud lelayla, even though it's designated for night. Yesh lasus boy keren echod agula. You should make a corner, a round corner, lepotre mitzitzis, to make it exempt from tzitzis. No, so why are people not doing this? So look, let's read those words very carefully. The Alter Rebbe is saying, he's not talking about a regular blanket. If you have a seder of sleeping by day, and you have this blanket with which you use for sleeping by day, then it becomes a beged yoim, and therefore it's chayiv v'tzitzis. But if you're not used to sleeping by day, the Alter Rebbe is not talking about your blanket. He's talking about a blanket which you'll sometimes use by day. Now, if you doubting this pshat, so then here I've got here the Sefer El Yorabo. He quotes here the Mogen Avraham. El Yorabo is a commentary on the Levush of Elia Shapira. It's got El Yorabo, El Yazuta too, a short commentary, a long commentary. So it's in the Sefer HaLevush, the new edition. It's got there on the page. So he writes like this. Mogen Avraham says that if you have a woolen sheet, you should make a round corner. Shuv matzosi begilyon shulchan aruch. Hoil ve'ein hascholas tashmish beyoim, loy mikri tashmish yoim. A klal, afilo lo Rambam. A very interesting chiddush. In this time of the year, the sun rises, let's say 5 in the morning. And so if you wake up at 6, wake up at 7, wake up at 8, you've been wearing it for 3 hours in the day. That doesn't make it a beged yoim. The fact that there's an overflow from the night into the day doesn't make your pajamas a beged yoim. It's still a beged lailo. Only such a garment which you'll dafka wear by night, then that becomes a beged yoim. Sorry, you'll dafka wear by day. That makes it a beged yoim. That explains why most of our blankets. When do you go to sleep during the day? Unless people get a bit older, they sometimes have to rest during the day. They rest with a blanket, without a blanket. But that seems to be a strong basis why people are not worried, because it's only talking about a blanket used for a dress during the day. I'm going to finish off this piece. I want to read something serious, and then I can tell you a funny thing. And that is, this is a letter of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and at the time he was born Tafresh Mem, so he's 36, and he's with his father in Rostov, and he says, "Niflei, I cannot restrain myself to see the pure God-fearingness of my father. When my father has a haircut with a special machine, sometimes I do the haircut for him. I noticed that the cloth, the sheet which he wears, not to get dirtied with the hair falling off when his haircut, before he puts on the sheet, he cuts off one of the corners of the sheet and makes it round. And it's obvious the intention. It shouldn't be a garment of 4 corners, and be chayv tzitzis. Now I understand, when we came to the hotel, he wouldn't use the covers, the blankets over there, even if they're pure white and very clean. But he was worried not to wear a 4-corner garment without tzitzis. Fascinating. So it looks like so now someone's asking, what about Shabbos? People have a rest. Shabbos, yeah, it's a mitzvah. Shabbos is a shina b'Shabbos tainug, Rosh Hashanah Shabbos. Here's a fascinating halacha. It says in Siman Yud Gimel, you come to shul on Shabbos and you don't have a talus. There's only one talus available, and it's got one tzitzah missing, or one of the tzitzah's apostle. That's the only talus available. So it says in Shulchan Aruch, you're allowed to wear that talus. And the reason is because, listen carefully, mitzvahs tzitzis, this is from the Mordechai in the Menachos, mitzvahs tzitzis is not like shatnez. Shatnez, the moment you put on shatnez, you violated shatnez. Mitzvah tzitzis is not the moment you put it on, but it's the moment you put it on, you have to put in tzitzis. You are kind of, when you put on a beg at the four corners, you've incurred a chiyuv to add tzitzis. Shabbos, you're honest. Shabbos, you can't put on the tzitzis. So on that basis, if you are stuck on Shabbos, and the only talus available is one without tzitzis, or the apostle tzitzis, you're allowed to put it on. So that explains, therefore, the fact that you have a shluch on Shabbos, it takes off. It's not a problem. Someone's asking a beggar to protect clothing is not chayiv, and certainly the hotel, the blanket in the hotel is not your beggar. Bichlal is not chayiv b'tzitzis. But you know what the frumkeiten of the Rebbe Rashabur, we've gone through this before. He had this tremendous frumkeiten. Perhaps he said, perhaps the schiris is considered like a balabatischkeit, and therefore the blanket becomes yours. Whatever. Okay. Someone's asking, does sewing in a corner work, or do you need to cut it? No, sewing is not going to be enough. You're going to actually have to cut off a corner. But if it's a quilt, please think twice before you do it. Before you start cutting off corners. Yeah. Perhaps sew it and then cut the corner before you lose all the things. But what I want to just share with you is that I heard from Moshe Katznelberger that when he came out of Russia, so he visited his brother in Cleveland, and it was about 9 o'clock in the evening, and some visitors came, and he just came out of Russia. It was a very big novelty at the time. So he asked him to come down from his room. So he had come to America, and they told him in America, England, whatever, and they showed him that people wear they wear pajamas. So there were these guests had come to the house. So Rav Moshe came down in evening wear. He was wearing his pajamas, and they found it very funny why he came down in his pajamas. He said, "But you told me this is what in this part of the world in the evening you wear pajamas." So he found it very funny. So okay. Right, so someone's asking a question. If you see someone wearing apostle tzitzis on Shabbos in the street, that's like another question, which is a big shaila. Okay, let's go on to another question about the bris. Very real question. A shliach somewhere in Europe has they know a woman who's Israeli, and she's married to a non-Jew. He's one of these Russians who came to Israel and there was never Megayer. So he's Al-Goyla Mahadrin. And they had a baby. And it's been 5 years since the baby's now 5 years old. They never had a bris. Finally now they've agreed to give the child a bris. But they're going to go to a goyish. They're going to go to a surgeon, a goyish surgeon. Then they asked the shliach. They asked him, "Would you be so kind to come along to the operation, to the procedure, and you'll be there?" So he's asking, "Is there any value in him going there?" And there's one side of it is there any value? And there may even be a downside. Let's say someone's making a bris with a goyish surgeon. So then that's going to be more people will learn that that's okay. So this is his dilemma. So he asked me. So here we have, first of all, we have here a quote to the top of the page, top left of the page. We have a quote from the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Reis Samach Hey, that it says a goy, even if he is circumcised, he shouldn't do a bris. He shouldn't be the moil. But if the goy did circumcise, then you don't have to do it again. In other words, even if there was a possibility of cutting some more, you wouldn't do it again. Then the Yesh Oimim, the Ramos says about Hatofas Dam bris, which people are familiar with. So now, before I started looking into this, what's the problem if a goy does a bris? Why is it possible? Is it because he doesn't do it lishma? So sometimes we have the idea of Yisrael Oimid al Gabov. If a goy is doing something, but the Eid is there and saying we're doing this for this and this purpose, that may benefit. So I was right and I was wrong. So here we have, this is the Gemara of Zora. Starts off, if a goy does a bris, it says don't have a goy do a bris because he may do something wrong. He may harm the child. Then Chachamim say that Chachamim would be okay if if there are others there to see that everything is being done correct. It would be okay, but not in private. And then, so then there's a discussion. But then the Gemara says that later that the various Chachamim say no. If a goy does a bris, it's possible, because we learn how only the one who's been chayiv b'mitzvah can do a bris. How we see that if goy does a bris, it's possible. The ato is bris tishmei. It has to be dafka yid. Dafka yid has to do the bris. So here we have. So that's why lechatchila for sure the Shulchan Aruch says you don't give a goy to do a bris. There are those tanoim who say that it would be valid, and possibly that's the reason why it's valid b'diavad. But then, as I was looking for this, I found a fascinating chiddush, which this is from Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Now, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, he published a siddur, as I've mentioned numerous times. He also put together a sefer called Migdal Oz, and that talks about the mitzvah of Milo and a few other things, Pidyon Haben, I think. So now, this is from the Migdal Oz of the Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who was Yaakov Emden was a contemporary of the Baal Shem Tov. Akum, a goy should not be circumcising at all. Now, even if if you can find a Jewish moil, so you have to bring him from elsewhere. Even if it means a delay of the mitzvah, past the time. If you are anticipating that a Jewish moil will come, then you have to delay the bris until you get a Jewish moil. But if you are in a situation that you don't expect ever a Jewish moil to come your way, odif, it's better to use a goy. Fascinating psak. If you are in a situation where there can be people in some deserted places, no moil, and there's no travel, etc. Not expecting any moil to come their way. So Rabbi Yaakov Emden says, have a goy do the circumcision. Now, coming back to this, so therefore, if the goy is now looking at this situation, the child hasn't had a bris for 5 years. Now they finally agreed only with the goyish surgeon. So there is something to be gained. If he's going to be there, it's going to be Omen Dal Gabov. If he's can persuade the surgeon to allow him to use the knife to do the actual chituch or part of the chituch, it will be done al Yidei Yisrael. So I feel there is what to be gained by him being there. And then the repercussions, other people will say, aha, he had a goy to do the bris. So he could say that, he could tell people that the surgeon allowed him to do something, and I can't tell you what he allowed me to do. In this way, it becomes private information, but he was there, and they made it as kosher as possible. That's my feeling in the given situation. After I looked into this, I just saw on one of the websites that there is in Hong Kong at the moment, they have a very serious problem that their children have been born, boys have been born, and because of lockdown, etc., and quarantine, there's no in the foreseeable future, near future, I don't see any moilim coming. But I don't think that would fall into the category of Rabbi Yaakov Emden, because there, lockdown is not going to be forever. So there's going to be a possibility of a moil coming. So therefore, they're going to have to delay until such time. Whereas in this case, it's like it was so open-ended that I think there's more reason to be makel. I don't know if you recognize. Let's Well, then we have here a question. A fellow, he's actually a shliach, and he had a building fund, and the money was just sitting there, so he lent it to another shliach, and then now he's ready to go ahead with his building, and the borrower has been defaulting and not paying. It was a 6-month loan. It's been a couple of years, and it's really so. He's now the lender is asking me. He's very chassidish guy, and he says it says in the Torah, you shouldn't oppress your borrower. And I'm worried what happens if I have I've perhaps overestimated the ability of my borrower. Perhaps he can't pay. By forcing him to pay, I'm doing something very wrong by forcing him. So what should I do about that? So I dug up this from the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. It talks about the issue of demanding. So that's the sif base. If you oppress the borrower who's poor, and you know that he doesn't have with what to repay, neither money nor portable items, then if you know that he hasn't and you still oppress him, then you're over loisir kanosha. Now there has been published an edition of the Alter Rebbe's Choshen Mishpat with a commentary by Rabbi Yaakov Ber Sternschliter, a Talmud of Rav Wosner. So it's called Imre Yaakov. So this is his commentary. So he says here, Mashma dafke beyodeya, aval im hu mesupik, mutar lo litvoya. If you're not sure, then you are allowed to demand. The Torah did it like ostra bozeh. You're not expected to know the other person's private accounts. And therefore, if you're going to say you can't because he might not have the money, then you're going to be saying that people can't demand their debts to be repaid. And therefore, he says in the third line, he says, the issue is only if you know for a fact that the borrower doesn't have any money, then it's wrong to oppress. But if he may have the money, so then you are allowed to oppress. And I hope he will take that and push for his thing, and he should be able to get the money back. The fellow can borrow from another source, and he should be able to go ahead with his building plan as for what the money was raised. Finally, this is a question which I arrived today, which I find a very big chiddush actually. And Geman from he's a shliach in Germany. He said, I bought a box of Israeli figs, and I want to give them as a gift to a goy. Is that okay? So, are you allowed to? If we want to eat those figs or dates, whatever, so we have to take trumas and maestros. Can you give? That we are going to assume that the food coming out of Eretz Yisrael, unless it has a hechsher, hasn't been meisted. Are you allowed to give non-meisted food to a goy? Tevel. The word for that is tevel, which not truma, not meisted. Are you allowed to give it to a goy to eat? And so I looked around, and the halacha poskim say you're not allowed to. And the source is from this Mishnah. This is the Mishnah in the end of Perek Aleph of Peah, where it says there's a concept called Miruah. That's a certain kind of smoothing the surface of the pile, which is like finishing that pile, and that's when it's chai v'maiser. So it says until the moment of meruach, which is, in other words, it's premature for maiser. Then you can feed to an animal. But once you've done meruach, once you've actually finished the harvest and the pile, and you've smoothed it, so then you wouldn't have to be b'machel behema, and the same thing, you wouldn't be a machel nochri. So in other words, what we're seeing here is that the consumption of food without trumas and ma'aser is being done, even though it's not for a bar chiyuva, it still remains also to do it. And therefore, this becomes now actually though a very big surprise for me, because then if you were a Jewish grocer and you sell a green grocer, and you have Israeli produce, you wouldn't be allowed to sell it to a Goyish customer, because you're going to be releasing stuff which is chayiv ma'aser, and it's not going to be ma'aser, which seems to be a big chiddush for me, but be that as it may. Meanwhile, I wish you all a feiche like boimer, kedai here b'shimon lismech alov, and we get out of this dachak, out of this pandemic, and out of this golus, and go to the geula amitas v'ashlema simchas olam al reishon.
Amen.
Amen.
Shkoyach, good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
Straight. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'll take